give them a disc, and then they can, they have some information. We're sort of in our second round of that data, so they actually have some comparative information as well. We also do a lot of town outreach regarding the Ag District Law and the provisions, and in particular the local laws and the right to the local laws are a big area where we do outreach, local laws and Ag District laws, because that seems to be where the conflict comes, and it comes primarily from what you guys were talking about earlier, which is the sewer and water extensions in Ag Districts and the impact on agriculture. We've done a lot of outreach and have, I think, all but one of our our fire districts who has signed on to have the fire tax exemption for farmland, and then we've also got local right to farm laws in most of our towns. So that's kind of our big list of accomplishments. That's not without challenges, but things are moving ahead, I think. One of the things, and having been here a long time already, is that when I started in Extension, and if we mentioned the word PDR, you'd practically get chased out of town by the farmers. And, there's been a lot of attitude change. There's an understanding of what PDR is now, and so I think farmers are much more understanding, and they understand, the whole process of keeping land in agriculture and why that's a benefit. As I already mentioned, local laws and the Ag District Law, that always seems to be a source of conflict, and the need for lots of communication with the town officials and looking at their zoning laws in particular. Farmers are looking for incentives, and I think that's a really hard thing. Where do you come up with incentives for farmers to stay in farming? The whole PDR process, we had one farm, our first farm, we were all kind of green in the whole process of moving forward, and so, it takes time. It took us about 3 years. It's complicated, and in the end, quite honestly, we're in a county where development pressures, the numbers are not exceedingly high, so the amount of money that the farmer gets totally, I really wonder. I haven't looked at their tax consequences and all of those things, but I really wonder what they get in the end and if it's really worth it for them. I shouldn't say that because we continue to get grants, which I think is great, but I think the economic consequences still need some serious consideration. In counties where development, the development value is not all that high. I would say it's average here, nothing exorbitant. This 25% match for PDR, having the farmers on top of that have to forfeit the 25%, I think is really something that needs to be addressed, whether it's the federal match or it's the opportunity to get some local funding that can provide that match. Maybe that's where municipalities need to step in and figure out ways to provide the 25%. And I think the hardest part is, all of these strategies are fine, except, we have currently 2 major farms, 1,000 acres each, that are very much on the brink of being lost. And it's really hard to see in an area like ours where there's lots of rural sprawl, to see big tracts like that are contiguous, all one parcel, start to possibly go up for either auction or sale. And I just think we need something that can work faster and quicker to save some important farmland, especially when really good soils are involved. So just a quick couple of slides on some other roles that we've been playing. Obviously, education, we do a lot around community ag awareness, whole variety of events and outreach type activities. We have a local foods guide like everybody seems to. And we also work pretty strongly in the realm of economic development, helping farmers with grants. Agritourism initiatives is something I've been involved in. We're doing a lot with farmer-buyer connections and markets and local food production. So some new dimensions, which of course are always exciting, that I feel like are opportunities for extension educators to get involved in. one dimension of planning for agriculture is planning for local food production. We always take kind of a land-based focus on planning for agriculture, but in reality, I think if you incorporate into that picture, it's not just about the land, it's also about the ability of the land to produce food. That makes it much more personal to people that are and engages a whole nother level of the community. And so I think planning for local food production should be considered as part of your planning for local agriculture. It's not just about the land, it's also about the food that's produced from the land. And then this is, again, something that can be incorporated into town ag plans. So these are sort of the new dimensions that we're undertaking. So obviously, why plan for local foods? We had a session at the AFT conference in Syracuse a couple of months ago on this topic and had a panel that addressed some of these issues. But food is a community resource. It's really an important economic basis. It has a land function. It's linked to the environment, linked to health, linked to culture and food security, and it's an important human need. So all of these things are related and bring the whole planning process into a new realm of much more people-oriented planning. I think it's something that's appropriate at all levels, whether it's the town or county or region or the state. And you would start much with the same as you do for any land use planning, is to think about what is your resource base for the farmers, what is your current production level, what's your potential, and what are some of the needs of those producers attempting to produce local foods, and how do you adjust the policies. And in some cases, what you need to do, is rebuild infrastructure that might be needed to sustain a local food sector. So, again, all of these approaches, whether it's the Ag Committee on the town plan or building a coalition around local food production, the important thing is to get all the stakeholders together. And I know some strategies have been to form food policy councils. That's one strategy. And I think the important thing is to look at what the resource base is, the strengths are of your community. If you already have some food production and processing, how do you build on that? And to be realistic, we don't need a slaughter facility in every county. Well, maybe we do, given, maybe I'll take that back, we might. But, we need to be able to think both locally, perhaps at a town level in one dimension, at a county level in another, and a regional level, but be able to collaborate and cooperate, especially when you're talking about food production. Just a little bit on town ag plans. I'm involved in 3 towns now, and how we're involved, actually, you might be interested to know, is in one town we have a consultant working, and so we're kind of a minor partner providing the monthly support to the Ag Advisory Committee. In another town, we're going to be more of a major partner providing most of the outreach, and in the third town, similarly. The other 2 towns are not thinking of hiring a consultant. They're just going to try to do as much of the work in-house with the county planning department is really important. A partner, soil and water, and so getting both an agency as well as the farmer steering committee together, I think, is really a good way to move forward. What I've done in 2 towns now, we've had sort of meetings that have been just meetings for every farmer. The nice thing about working at a town level is that sadly, there aren't that many farmers, so you can have a breakfast meeting, and they all come, and they like to see each other. So it's usually been fairly effective, except for those few that never like to go to meetings anyhow. And so there's the steering committee that might form out of a larger farmer meeting. There might be a consultant involved in that. There certainly should be the agency partners, and then keeping the meetings moving and synthesizing and understanding what's being said, that it starts to inform the process is kind of what we've been doing. So the next thing is the analysis, and John and David have mentioned this. You need to look at what you want to protect, what's the value of that land, what's the development pressure, all of those kind of things. So I think all of that's been mentioned. One thing that's come up that I really think is something critical to look at is what's going to happen. What is that future of that particular farm? There are many last generation farms, and if that farm goes out of business, what happens next? And then another issue that's come up a lot is the fact that there's a lot of non-farm land being rented, and what's the future of that land, and what do those landowners want to do? Do they want to develop their land in the future? Are they planning to sell? What's the impact on agriculture if there's a change in that land ownership? So I think those are the two critical points to focus on when you're doing some interviews with the farmers, to be realistic. What's going to happen in the next 20 to 50 years in terms of agriculture? So some of the things that farmers have been coming up with that they seem pretty, willing to consider or interested in is lease of development rights. They're on their own, really. A lot of them are, if they're selling land, they're selling the less productive land. And the other thing that those farmers that are looking for land to rent have indicated they would love to have a database of when land becomes available to rent, so they know right away they can contact the landowner. And there's also interest, obviously, in beginning farmers and linking them to new, to land that's available. There's an interest in, kind of thinking about, well, if I'm going to have residences all around me, what is the kind of farming that should be part of that community, that fits well with the community? Certainly people don't feel like they would want to start a large dairy in a situation where there's lots of houses around. Incentives are talked about, but what specifically those mean, I'm not sure yet. Right to farm is something that's talked about, and the need to educate the public. So some of the challenges that we've come up with, one is, and David referred to this, is really, we've gotten really hung up in one of the towns on criteria for lands to protect and trying to assign a point system, and it's turned out to be kind of counterproductive. And so I think we're going to take a different approach and not worry about criteria. We're sort of developing zones and describing those zones, like one area of a town that's more heavily being developed versus area of the town that seems predominantly agriculture, and what the strategies might be in those different zones. But criteria, at least in one of the towns that I've worked in, has turned out to be kind of getting us nowhere. So I think a challenge is to be too focused on just land use and, protecting the land, and just be too focused on this map-based process as opposed to really looking at the farmers and what their plans are, looking at the economic impact. So, and I think another thing that I could use everybody's help on that's on the call is really what are some new ideas, some new examples and new solutions, because I think we know the basic things, the basic strategies, but I think everyone's looking for something new and different. And obviously things will change in the future. So I think as I've gone through the process with the towns that I've started to work with, it's one of the things that I'm looking for is sort of new ideas, new approaches, stepping away from the land use planning box entirely and looking at ways to be a little broader in our thinking, to look at economic development and look at food system planning and some of those other dimensions. And I think funding will be a challenge, obviously, to implement, and then I'm looking for other suggestions that people may have. That's the end of my presentation, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Monica. I think we actually have some questions and comments already. I think maybe the best way to do this would be to just go through the questions and give Monica the first opportunity to respond to them. But the other presenters might want to chime in as well on some of these topics. So the first one we have is what about implementation grants in those counties or towns where purchase of development rights or PDRs is not really the priority that the plan calls for? Currently, no funding is available for any implementation efforts other than PDR. So do we have some comments on that from first Monica and then the others?
Well, I think that's more of an ag and markets question because they're the funders.
Okay, it did come when John was talking, but okay.
Good. And I believe that the department is open for suggestions, and I am encouraging towns to identify other alternatives besides PDR. I've been in communication with a number of towns, and they're more interested in the lease of development rights, and I'm recommending that they put that in the top of their recommendation in terms of state action. I think it is important for you to realize that the commissioner will be looking at these plans and recommendations, and if we had 51 towns saying lease of development rights should be explored as a model or an example or a pilot program, I think it would be something that should be considered. That is just an example, but the department has funded a transfer of development right program out in the town of Lysander as an alternative to the PDR program. So they're all alternatives. The Farmland Protection Implementation Grant Program does not specifically say PDR only. And we are interested in other examples and opportunities to protect agriculture. I recommend that you work through your county plans and your town plans and look at those other suggestions.
Okay. David, did you have anything quick on that one, or should we go on to the next one?
Yeah. John's point is very well taken. A number of the county agricultural and farmland protection plans, particularly in western New York, thinking of Genesee County, Livingston County, Cattaraugus County, Wyoming County, all pointed to the need for some type of state-level lease of development rights program. And so, last year, legislation was in both houses of the state legislature and actually passed the state senate that would have created what was being called a working farmland tax credit. So it was going to be a state income tax credit equal to the property taxes paid on farmland that was receiving agricultural assessment in an ag district, and the landowner was willing to commit to keep it in active ag use for at least 8 years. And so what John's suggesting about putting those ideas in plans, that really is what led to that legislation. Now, unfortunately, it failed in the assembly, and, well, our state budget has gone downhill. So I don't see good prospects for it in the short term, but I think John's absolutely right that, certainly pointing to these needs can lead to action in Albany. In terms of the other state funding, though, I will mention there is a program that Department of Agriculture and Markets has called the Farmland Viability Grants Program, which is also intended to help, explicitly county governments implement farmland protection plans more on the economic development side. And I'm not sure if that got any money this year or not, but certainly that's another place where we can continue to point to funding needs to help communities implement agricultural and farmland protection plans.
Great. Next question. Here's a softball. It's actually directed originally, I think, at Monica, but you may all have some thoughts about this. Any insights on how you can find good farmer board members?
Well, my experience just in the, getting the larger group of farmers together initially and then weaning them down to the actual steering committee has been just a process of who seems to show interest and attend. I found that, you know, sometimes it comes from the unlikely farmers, and some are just committed from a personal perspective because they want to see agriculture continue. Some are long-term community members that have a really great perspective. Some are farmers who rent a lot of land, so they also know what the landowners are doing and thinking. So far, I'm not sure. Our advisory committees have been comprised of farmers largely. I'm not sure that's, I think you want some non-farmers there too. And they also include a, strong liaison back to the county or the town government. So either the deputy supervisor or the supervisor or a town board member is always present.
Yep, and Monica, and just to add, it's John Brennan here. It appears that many towns are conducting farmer interviews, just as you had talked about, and they may interview from 10 to 19, 20 farmers, and from that interview process, folks have been identified, and farmers with sort of fire in the belly, so to speak, in terms of wanting to do more, and that's certainly a way to identify farmers that could possibly be good members of an ag protection board. So it's through that process that we.
So good. So we've had some procedural suggestions, and also I think some of your suggestions are really starting to lay out what you think a good farmer board member would mean. David, do you have any additional thoughts?
No, I think Mark and John, did a good job.
Okay. Next question. I think this is directed initially at you, David. Where can I get more information on how to conduct a cost of community services study for our county? But again, if anybody else wants to chime in on that after David's taken a crack.
Well, David, I could certainly send to you. We have kind of a brief fact sheet about COCS studies, about 4 pages in length, which gives you the short overview, and that I could send, we could distribute to everybody. And then you can find a whole host of them on our farmlandinfo.org webpage. Just go, you can select cost of community services studies. And so we've actually got a number of the studies up there. You can also go, we wrote a book about COCS studies. But there's been a number of them here in New York State. My knowledge is about 15 to 20. And at a county scale, it can be a little complicated. I think Monica in Tompkins County is a little bit unique. I'm not sure, Monica, if you know, how many other counties do county level assessment in New York?
Yeah, I don't think there were.
Only one other.
I think we're probably the only one.
Nassau County does county level assessment as well.
But I had a planning grad student do the work.
Okay.
Had the luxury of having someone to work all summer to gather the data.
Okay.
Just to clarify, David, on that question, is there in some of that documentation the how-to aspect of it, as well as what the results were aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in some of the COCS studies we've got here in New York, they kind of describe how individual studies were done, and then the book that we produce, which is on our Farmland and farmland.org website, you can find that. I will tell you, doing it at county scale in New York would be a little bit tough, just because you'd have so many different taxing jurisdictions to work with, and so really you've got to go through with some set of individuals that really know what each expense side was and be able to categorize all that, and then also the income side, you have to be able to categorize that as well by land use. And so it really depends on how your data is organized and if you can find the right people to efficiently go through those questions. Otherwise, it can take a lot of time, a lot of work.
And again, because we have countywide assessment, that was one jurisdiction we were dealing with, so that was easier.
Yep.
Yep. Most often, I think there's been about 15 to 18 of them done in New York at a town scale. I think Tompkins is the only one I've seen done at a county scale in New York.
Okay, there's another question here. Can someone address what the role is for groups like CADE and Central New York Resource Conservation and Development in this process? Anybody?
Well, I suppose you could be consultants to towns too, but it's the process is pretty straightforward. So I could see where you could help lead a town through the process if the towns are interested in developing a plan, and you could work with them as American Farmland Trust does, or as Extension does. Or, if there isn't any entity otherwise to work with the town, then you could certainly play that role.
Absolutely, we encourage that.
I think there's also a lot of opportunity too when you get done with the plan. I think a lot of towns are going to be looking for help in implementation, and so I'm just thinking about where those two groups are located. I mean, geez, you've got a cluster of communities in Cayuga County, Cortland County, Tompkins County, Onondaga that are all going down this road. If you see some consistency across the plans, for some needs, on as Monica suggested, some of the local food marketing fronts, some of the infrastructure needs. I think this is where if other groups, nonprofits, can bring some resources to help communities implement those plans, I think that's great leveraging of what towns are doing.
Okay, we had a couple questions and maybe comments as well on the relationship between farmland protection and the changing price of oil, kind of the macro level changes that are going on. Does anybody want to kind of peer into the future a bit and comment on what they think is important about those issues in relation to farmland protection?
I will.
Okay. I was
way down that road. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I don't know if anybody saw the last National Geographic, last couple of them. They've had some major articles about will we be able to feed ourselves in 30 years, 50 years, and I think there are projections for needed doubling our food production by 2050. Well, we need to have farmland to produce that food. And so I think in a place like New York, where we have a wealth of land resources, if we lose that land, we're losing those opportunities to grow that type of food here, whether it be for a consumer down the road or a consumer further around the world. I do think that as if oil prices, when oil prices tick back up again, it's going to make those arguments for the type of local food system work that Monica was talking about even more compelling, and make some of those things even more economically viable. So I think the farmland protection piece is critical, because if we lose that land, I don't see a lot of examples of us ripping up water lines, sewer lines, subdivisions to put crops back in that ground. I mean, if we lose that land base, we're losing those types of opportunities for food production. So I think it's incredibly compelling. This is a great time for these issues.
Yeah, and I think that is an important way that you can build a case for making the farmland protection argument is based on the need for local food. So.
And just to add in and peering into the future, trends that I'm seeing through the local town planning activities, it's really the identification of sort of smaller niche farming that is attracting the younger population, folks who are interested in developing the artisan cheese or specialty herbs. Those niche markets out there, it's attracting a great deal of younger folks. The younger folks are not being attracted to the gigantic dairies that are very expensive to buy into, but they're starting small, they're building, they may eventually add 10, 15 acres to their property as they grow. and it's trying to identify the younger farmers and these niche farms that have a future and have a possibility in a market in not only the county but the section of the state and the whole state in general. So it's not only working with the younger farmers but also identifying markets, whether they're in the larger urban areas or and the transportation units that bring products to New York City, which seems to be identified as a need in recent statements from city officials down there. So that's my peer into the future.
Okay, well, unfortunately, it looks like we're coming right to the end of the time we've allotted for this. We did have one other inquiry about getting contact information for the presenters, and Heidi, I believe, will be able to send that out to all the people who are registered. Beyond that, I think we got to all the questions. We'll double check and make sure, and if not, we'll try and get some other. If there's anything we didn't get to, we'll make sure that we follow up on that in writing. And besides that, I'd just like to thank all of the presenters today. We'll turn it over to Heidi in a second for some wrap-up comments. But beyond that, thank you, all three of you. I'm hearing deafening applause from where I'm sitting. And beyond that, Heidi, do you want to add a few things?
I just want to thank David Kay, David Haight, John Brennan, and Monica Roth very, very much for joining us today. I think this was great. So we also want to just recognize Paul Treadwell with Cornell Cooperative Extension Administration, who has provided technical support for this series, including today, and has shared his office to make this possible. So we just want to say thank you. I just want to also let you know that you'll receive an email from me later today with a link to an evaluation of today's webinar, and we'd appreciate it if you take time to fill it out and provide your feedback. It will help us as we continue the series. So we have one more webinar for this semester, and we'll be doing a couple more next semester. I just want to point out that the next one is on June 23rd from 2 to 3:30, and that's focused on wind energy, and we'll be sending out some a little bit more detailed information about the panelists and the specific take on that topic at the end of the week. So look for it in CCE News and the other outlets, the Cardi communique that you've seen this one advertised in. The other thing is that in the email I sent today, we will send contact information for the presenters and a couple other things. So for example, there were several links that the presenters provided in their presentations. We'll put those into an email so you have them as hot links. We'll also let you know the website where you can access the archived copy of this presentation, which I do have to note, to my extreme embarrassment, it's going to be partial because I didn't hit the record button as soon as I intended to. So I'm terribly sorry about that. You'll only get that partial, but we will put up the PowerPoint presentation so that you can flip through that as well. So this next email that you'll have from me today will include these follow-up materials, and if David Haight sends that 4-pager, the fact sheet on the cost of community services, we'll include that with it as well. So, and again, if there's any final questions, please feel free to email them to me by email, and we can pass them on to our presenters. Monica did just, you'll see, put her contact information back up, so we'll get the rest of it up to you. And I guess